Welcome to the DFO Rundown podcast with Frank Saravalli and Jason Greger on dailyfaceoff.com. Delivered by DoorDash.
Welcome to episode 55 of the DFO Rundown. I'm Jason Greger alongside Frank Saravalli, coming to you once again, as always, from our woodjerseys.com studio. Of course, we got the Boston Bruins studio over my show, not studio, jersey, and Frank has the Toronto Maple Leafs. You can get any one you want. It's an NHL licensed product. You can get it at woodjerseys.com. Of course, we saw the new unveiling of the Kraken. They have lots of teams, and they'll have pretty much all of them by the start of this coming season, which is creeping closer by the day, basically under 2 months now to the start of the 21-22 NHL regular season. Frank, how's it going?
Hard to believe, isn't it? Under 60 days to puck drop in the regular season. That means training camps are right around the corner.
Yeah, should be about just over a month away. So should be fun. Lots going on. The Minnesota Wild, for a team that, man, they've been in the storylines in the summer for a lot of reasons, mainly financially with buyouts, and now Fiala's going to arbitration. Team offers 4. Fiala comes in at 6.25. So do they split it right down the middle, just over 5? We'll wait and see. And then, of course, the big story, Kaprizov. And you'd reported last week that he's got an offer from Russia, but there is a salary cap in Russia. So how much can he really, do you think he can come close to $7 or even $8 million in Russia?
It's way north of that. It's, to my knowledge, it's an 8-figure offer that's on the table. I believe it's significantly north of 10 million as well. They'd love to have him back. There's no question about that. He comes to the NHL, north of a point per game player, changes the look and feel of the Minnesota Wild in the absolute prime of his career at age 25. And, I saw lots of different reactions, Jay, after sending out the tweet, that this is the biggest ruse of all time, empty threat. There's no chance he goes back. He's been there the entire time this summer. And I think there's a number of important things to point out. And I'm carrying no one's water in stating these facts. He's been in Russia. He's, gone through the flirtation process with CSKA, CSKA Moscow, his former team, one of the wealthiest teams, at least in terms of backers, in the KHL. And there was lots of talk about a salary cap in place in Russia, that it comes out to right around $12 million per team per year. Russia doesn't necessarily abide by rules and the salary cap here. So I don't think that's a factor. Maybe on paper it is, but whatever payments are made behind the scenes or a bag of cash, a duffel bag of cash that's delivered, whatever he can net in Russia in 1 year is way more. It would take him 2 or 3 years to earn here in the NHL. So that's important to point out. And the other part is we're now dealing with a time crunch. Dealing and related to the pandemic, it takes about a month to get the proper work visa in place for Russians to come to the United States. Guys who have had their contracts done or are dealing with multi-year deals don't have this same problem because they can come back on their previous visa. But for a guy like Kaprizov, who doesn't have a contract and doesn't have an ability to work in the U.S. at the moment, I saw a report out there that he had plane tickets purchased. That's great, but he can't come into the U.S. to work without having a contract in place. And it takes about a month to do that. So if training camp opens on, say, the 23rd, 24th, somewhere in that neighborhood, to get him to Minnesota, we're talking about a deal needing to get done in the next week here to get him in for the on-time start of training camp. So the clock is ticking. September 1st is the date that the season starts. And in the KHL. And I think the other part of it too, Jay, and it's important to point this out, if there's no deal in place with Minnesota, I don't think it's out of the question that he begins the season in Russia and collects, $1 million or $2 million and has an out clause in his contract to come back to the NHL if indeed he gets a deal done with the Wild to leave the team. So you could see him playing in September in the KHL. And I really, people think that's just an empty threat. I don't think so at all in this case.
It'll be fascinating to see if that occurs. And the interesting thing is, from a Minnesota perspective, he's had one season in the NHL. It was a very good season. Don't get me wrong. Electrifying young player, but he's also a winger. And I wonder, I can see the trepidation from Minnesota. Like when you're hearing that he want, $9-10 million, you're like, I don't know, like he hasn't proven that yet. There's lots of guys who can have one good year. What if that's his career year? Now, maybe he'll be better, right? You would like to think, and I think Minnesota is going to bet that he's going to be better. But I can understand why there's a little bit of, hey, we need to see a little bit more than 1 year before we're going to lock a guy down for 7 or 8 years at huge money. Like there is a risk involved there.
Well, there is a risk involved, but that's not the risk. That's not the risk that the Wild believe is really the issue here. Because they, to this point, up until a couple weeks ago, had almost exclusively wanted him on a 7 or 8 year deal, meaning that he had already shown them that he can do it. I mean, 27 goals in 55 games last year. That's a 40 goal pace over an 82 game season. And as you mentioned, he changed the look and feel of that team. So, they're not concerned in offering a 7 or 8 year deal. I think their issue is, and part of it's just, for the Wild, the tough part is he came over so late that at age 24, he turns 25 next April. He's so close to unrestricted free agency. The team has no appetite or interest in a 2 or a 3 year deal. I don't think the player wants to get to 6 years. So they'd probably have to come in somewhere around 4 or 5 years. And the numbers, to my knowledge to this point are still pretty expensive, to the point where, it's been unpalatable for Minnesota. So they've gone back and forth. I think the tough part is it's gotten ugly. He doesn't have arbitration rights, obviously, at this point, and there's not a lot that he can do. But geez, I think there's been a lot of frustration on both sides as this has twisted and turned here over the last bit since they really started to begin talking in April.
And another name that obviously hasn't got the same amount of hype, but he's going to be a future Hall of Famer. The Florida Panthers just signed one in Joe Thornton. There'd been lots of talk about maybe Zdeno Chara joining them where he's training in the offseason. What are you hearing about Big Z? Do you think, does the Thornton signing, I know completely different positions, but does that help increase, decrease the chances of Chara signing with the Panthers?
I was going to say, is there an NHL limit in terms of 40 plus players that you can add to your roster? I mean, that would be pretty incredible if you saw Zdeno Chara sign there. I still think Chara's weighing his options. I'm not sure if Florida remains on the table or not. But, for a guy that can come in and give you 16 to 18 quality minutes, you never have to worry about his shape. I would imagine that there's a number of teams that, you see the Caps and the reports that you got back from him joining them on a 1 year deal, rave reviews in terms of his leadership and everything that he brought to the room. So, I was a little bit surprised to see Joe Thornton sign there, but I was actually really intrigued in his comments, just saying that he thinks that this team has a real chance to win and has, really turned into a contender almost overnight here over the last, 16, 18 months. And I think he's seeing what we talked about a number of weeks ago as we sort of sifted through the offseason. That team is locked and loaded and ready to go. Like I really think Florida's going to be a real team to watch this upcoming season.
Well, I like Florida a lot. I still think they need another defenseman if they want to go on a deep run. Obviously, the Aaron Ekblad injury, like him and Mackenzie Weegar, they're legit. I just think I could see them adding another defenseman by the deadline for sure. Now, the other news that's pretty big is the NHLPA came out and, fairly strongly, Frank, suggesting to players to be vaccinated. And, we've seen, other leagues do this. This is the NHLPA. So, you know what? That's basically coming. It's not from the owners. They're not telling you. It's like your union themselves is recommending you get this done. Do you see this? Will we see situations where some players really go against this and could lead to them possibly losing paychecks?
Will we? Yes. I think there's going to be a number of players from each team that end up holding out. Some teams you're going to get in the 90+% range, 95% where their roster is mostly vaccinated. I just think there's a number of players and they're, just take it and slice off a general, part of the population. Even in Canada, 1/6 of the country still not vaccinated yet. In the US, the number is obviously higher. it's players' choice, but the NHL has and the NHLPA have made it clear you do so at your own peril, not just of your own health risk, but also peril of your own wallet and bank account. If you need to miss games, Canada is going to be instituting a travel requirement for any traveler entering the country to be fully vaccinated. And so, if your team is playing in Canada, for instance, and you don't have a special exemption in place, which, may not come in this case, in a national interest special exemption, which the NHL has gotten to play both the Stanley Cup final in Canada and also the bubble in Edmonton, if that exemption doesn't exist, you won't be able to cross the border and play with your team. So you'd need to stay home. And so that's another significant requirement that's going to be a big part of this.
Oh, well, it would be huge for, teams in the Pacific where you got three teams, obviously teams out who take on Ottawa and Montreal and Toronto.
The Atlantic,
two specific divisions for sure that have a direct correlation to this. And those are the teams that I'm going to be watching because it does impact them. If all of a sudden you have one or two guys who can't come on a road trip, that's severely going to impact. And you could see that causing a little bit of concern amongst amongst teammates saying, hey, wait a sec here. Like, unless you've got a medical reason not to do it, you can't just say, well, I don't believe in it. I'm not sure that'll stand.
In effect, what they're doing is making the vaccine a requirement without making it a requirement. That's sort of the pressure that's being applied, here throughout the U.S. is make the restrictions so severe for people that aren't vaccinated that it leaves them little other choice but to get vaccinated. So, it's sort of, the way that the NHL has approached a lot of different things over the years is put people in a position where this is what they have to do. And just like, fighting, for instance, we're not going to remove fighting from hockey, but we're going to change the game and change the rules so that, those types of players become extinct and we don't even have to have the conversation about banning fighting. It's just going to become such a, minimal part of the game that, eventually everyone just moves on. And so that's sort of the same tact and approach that they're taking with regards to, trying to make vaccines mandatory, which they're not going to do. It's just, they're going to make it pretty punitive for those that don't have it. And already it's not just the ability to go on road trips. It's also how those players are going to be treated that aren't vaccinated in terms of testing requirements, different procedures and protocols that they're going to have to follow that people that are vaccinated and players that are vaccinated won't.
Yeah, and the Winnipeg Jets have already made it mandatory for fans to be vaccinated if they want to come. The San Jose Sharks saying it's a mandatory vaccination, or you have to have a negative test 72 hours before the start of the game, which means
Winnipeg's vaccination and mask for fans.
Yeah,
that's a unique step.
Yeah, so I'll be curious to see how many other teams. I think teams will. All it takes is one to be a leader. And then others want to see what the backlash and response is. And I think you'll see more and more slowly because this is big business. And these teams recognize if we can't have fans in our building, then all of a sudden we're losing legit revenue. And the players have to understand that too. They already owe $1 billion. So I think both sides, the players and the owners, will want to have as many fans as possible in the stands this season. Let's get to our guest today. Of course, he's the head coach of the Edmonton Oilers, Dave Tippett. And now we get to our big guest delivered by DoorDash, restaurants and more delivered right to your door. Many of your favorites. I know Frank might have ordered a few Big Macs the other day. You can get all of that. And if you're new to DoorDash, you're a first-time user, use the promo code RUNDOWNDD. You get 25% off your first time and no delivery fees. So it's great. We welcome in today. He's currently the head coach of the Edmonton Oilers. He's 20th all-time in games coached. He's 18th all-time in games won at 625. He was an undrafted player, went to college, then signed with the Hartford Whalers. Spent over a decade in the National Hockey League. Dave Tippett joins us. Tip, welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
Great. Good to be with you guys this morning.
So now I know you're a pretty avid golfer. How many rounds you get in this summer so far?
You know what? I used to be an avid golfer, and I've really struggled with one of my hands. I've had a couple surgeries on it and a plate and some screws put in one finger, and I haven't played as much. And it's funny. I had a guy mention to me down in Scottsdale a few weeks ago, have you tried these new Bryson DeChambeau grips? And I had only played 2 times going into a couple of weeks ago, and I put these new grips, these great big, they're real fat grips on it, and because I have a couple fingers that don't work anymore, and I put them on. I couldn't play 2 days in a row before that, and I put these grips on, and actually I've played about 5 times in the last 10 days. So it had saved my golf career, but I did play a lot. I was playing a lot down in Scottsdale, and I got away from it, but hopefully I can play a little more now.
So the grip, just now you don't have to squeeze as tight? Is that the reason why it helps?
It's just bigger. I have one finger that has a plate, and it's funny, when they did the surgery, I got the doctor to put a bend in the plate so I could at least get it around the club a little bit. But on my right hand, I really only have 2 fingers that end up working. So I've got to have something that I don't have to grab onto. I can just kind of lay it in my hand. So I played all right. So it's going in the right direction. Hopefully it helps.
So now, at the peak of your golf playing career, Dave, what was the best part of your game, and what was your average score?
I was about 3 years ago. I think my index was around 5 or 5.5, something like that. So I was playing. I don't hit it real long, but I hang around. But I was regular in the 70s a few years ago. No, wasn't that this weekend playing a scramble, but I got to a point where when I was playing a lot, you obviously get better. When you don't play much, you don't play as well.
Dave, was that a hockey injury there with your hand? What happened?
Yeah, I've got a thumb that I think I broke it 12 times and had surgery on the tendon. And then it's my ring finger on my right hand. Just the arthritis was so bad that it finally they went in and they said, we're going to fuse these joints in it. So I've struggled with it for a while. It's really it's been a painful process to finally get it try to fixed a little bit. And the one way when I had surgery there about 1.5 years ago, the last surgery on it, the guy just said, look, I can't make them work any better, but I can make it so it won't hurt as much. And that's put all the metal in it and just froze everything up on it. So it worked great, but it doesn't hurt anymore. So we'll deal with it.
Yeah, it's just an important reminder for us all. I think a lot of people don't recognize, some of the injuries that former players are still dealing with. And obviously you've been coaching a long time. Wanted to ask you, just in terms of your coaching career, how different do you think of a coach you are now compared to you were a few years ago? Like, how much do things change? I talked to a lot of different coaches, and sometimes the answer is not so much, but you had a little bit of time off. You had a chance to sort of evaluate and take a step back. Are you a different coach now, you think, than a few years ago?
I think you always evolve as a coach, and times change, methods change. It's funny, the golf tournament I played this weekend, it was Ronnie Francis and I, and there was a couple of young college coaches with us, so they wanted to talk a lot of hockey and a lot of coaching. And the guy said, well, what are the new trends? What are we doing different here? I said, you know what? There's a lot of things that get new names, but ultimately they're new names. They're the same thing. Staying above the puck, third guy high. Joel and I were laughing and said, you know what? There's a simple principle. When the puck's in the corner and two guys go and get it or go after it, the guy that comes out with it, that team usually has a better chance of winning. So there's a lot of things that tactically, have the game has evolved, but ultimately there's a lot of things that are still the same. There's a will and a skill that has to be in place. That if you do things right and do things smart and play well as a team, you can usually find ways to win. So, the media, social media, all those things change. Players' mindsets change, so you have to evolve with that as it's gone. So you'd be lying to say it hasn't changed, but there's some underlying principles in there that have stayed the same.
Now, Dave, for you, Ray Ferraro told me that when you were teammates in Hartford, he was like, man, Dave always was taking notes on different things. Was coaching something you always thought you were going to do, or were you just always a student of the game, even when you were a player?
No, I wouldn't say I thought about coaching when I was playing, but I was a player, I was undrafted, and I used to score a little bit in junior, and everybody liked to score. But when I went to college, I had a coach named Gino Gasparini at University of North Dakota that really preached some, we had to play a good team defense. And then I went to the Olympic team with Dave King, and we had, he just put me in the third line center. You're going to be our checking center, and here's what you're going to do. And I learned how to play that role. And ultimately, that's the only reason I got a chance to play in the NHL, because I was a penalty killer and a checker. And if I would have relied on my skill to score, I'm competing against Gretzky and Francis and those guys. I wasn't going to make it, So, you just learn the game. You learn about the different parts of the game. And as an NHL player, I'm in there. I'm just trying to survive. And you think about how things you can do to make sure you're helping the team, even if they're not offensive stuff. There are ways to help your team win. And those are all things that I continue to think about to the end. Once I finished playing, it was one of those ones where I love the game. I like the camaraderie with players. I like being around the rink, and it was just a natural progression into the coaching part of it.
You mentioned that maybe tactically the game hasn't changed. The communication, the coaches that you had, maybe, and how they approached, talking to players compared to how you talk to players now in 2021, Dave. Like, you even go back to the early 2000s. I keep hearing, players want to know as much as they can. They ask more questions than ever before. Are you more of a mental coach maybe now than ever before? Not so much the changes tactically, but just in communication.
Communication for sure. I mean, when I first started playing, my first coach was Tex Evans, old Jack Evans in Hartford. He never talked to anybody. It would be weeks before, and even in practice, we'd have a practice, the first practice of the year, he would go and stand a certain place, and he would say, after this, when I stand here, this is what I want you to do. And he didn't talk to anybody hardly, so now players, there's two things. There's one, you have to communicate with your players. They expect it, and that's just the way of the world right now. The other thing is, I really believe that the players are smart. The players understand the game. They understand the feel of your team, how you're playing, and you want their input. They're smart guys. You want their input. You want them to be part of it. And a guy that I know people have had questions about, Brizgalov, the goalie I had in Arizona. Briz was a little off the wall when he's talking to the media and talking to you guys. Ultra smart guy. He would come to me, and we had to play a real tight defensive game and keep things outside. He would come to me after a game and he'd go, "Tip, fellas played good. Nothing today. Easy day for me." And then he'd come and say, another time, "Hey, Tip, too much inside. Let's make sure we talk about that." So smart guys. Another one, Mike Liut, who I just played golf with this weekend. Ultra smart guy when it comes to the game. So players have a great read on where things are going. That's one thing that people probably don't understand about Connor. Connor is a really, really smart hockey person. He understands the game. He understands what's going on, understands his role, obviously, but the defensive side, like you talk about with him, and if he hasn't thought about it, you bring it up, he's dialed into it, so players are smart. You need their opinion. And I believe that coaching is not just about a coach telling the players to do this. It's about building a team and building a team that works together. And our staff, I think, works like that. I think our team, if you asked them, how does the coaching staff work, they would say that they're in pretty good sync. And if the coaching staff's in sync, the players are in sync, and then we mold it all together, and that's how you build a good team.
You mentioned in sync, Dave, and having a feel for your team. That's actually one of the things that struck me from the comments from your players following the disappointing sweep last season, was just that everyone seemed to be on board in terms of the process that this team needs to take in order to get where it wants to get to. How do you view this offseason and the changes that were made? Obviously, a number of pieces coming back. You keep a guy like Tyson Barrie, you bring in a guy like Duncan Keith and the experience that he provides, and then up front the changes with Zach Hyman and Warren Fogle. How much are those changes going to help you get to where you want to get to?
Well, I think it really helps our group. If you look at where we've been for 2 years, and when Ken and I came a couple of years ago, we're trying to fill the biggest thing. Everybody knows we have top players. We have top players that drive our team, and that's not going to change. But those top players, once you get into the playoffs, they need help. They need help. And there's a fine balance of relying on them too much, which we had to do a little bit, and adding some depth that we think that can balance our team out, still have those players making sure that they're contributing at the level that they need to. But we just need to have some balance in it, and it's more 5-on-5 than anything that we need to continue to build our team. Our special teams have both been pretty good. We lost a couple penalty killers, but we brought some good people in. Derek Ryan is a good penalty killer. Hyman's a good penalty killer. So I think we'll be fine there. We've changed some of our defense. Losing Larson was something that we had to address. We think Cody Ceci, in some of the video I've watched from last year in Pittsburgh, he was a solid player, really solid player. So we're hoping he comes in and can play the same way. Tyson Barrie had a nice rebound year last year. He's a really good offensive player, drove #1 power play in the league, along with Connor and Leon and Nuge. So he's coming back. And probably Keith is a unbelievable veteran. I had a long talk with Joel Quinville this weekend about Duncan, and he thinks Duncan's going to be great. He says he's really motivated, and that's what I found when I talked to him too. The key guy for us this year is Evan Bouchard. He's ready to take another step. I think he'll be a lot in the vein of Jesse Puljujarvi last year, where he'll come in, we'll get him kind of settled in, but I think you'll see his game evolve throughout the year, where he starts taking a bigger role with us. So I like our team. I think we have more depth. I think our players are motivated to take that next step. And you say that every year, but ultimately this is, of the 3 years or the third year I'm going to be here, this is the one where I think we have the most opportunity to do that.
What is the message to a guy like Bouchard then? Because I think on paper, he's, a young guy. He understands what's happening around him, and he probably looks at the top four and says, there might not be a lot of room for me to slide in there. How do you approach training camp with a young player like that?
Oh, he's been, there's been a lot of talk about him not playing. He's been unbelievable. He's been phenomenal. And, we talked about the opportunity to go down and play some games last year in Bakersfield when he wasn't playing much. And he felt like he was getting way more with our team here. And it's because he played in Europe. He played a bunch of games in Europe before he came over. But the pace, how he was playing in practice, and the coaching, that Jimmy Playfair spends a lot of time with him, that he feels like his game is just ready to take off. And, as a coach, the players dictate. I can't just say, okay, you're a third pair guy, and all of a sudden you start playing like a top four. Why should we leave you in the third pair? So those things evolve during the year, just like Jesse Puljujarvi. Like I said, we started him on the third line, and halfway through the year, he's playing with Connor most of the time. So there's young players that push their way in, and that's how you make your team better.
You mentioned your penalty kill, Dave, and Ethan Bear was a really good penalty killer. Same with Adam Larson. When you switch the top of the penalty kill, is it easier maybe to rotate your forwards in? Is there a little bit more concern in the defense just because they're closer and they got to make the real important reads, because a lot of the power plays now, most of the plays happen closer to the net. How does the challenge come when you're probably going to have to play either Evan Bouchard or, like a Slater Cuckoo or Chris Russell on their offside as your second pair on the penalty kill? How much of a challenge is that going to be for your PK unit?
Well, certainly something we've thought about for sure. I mean, CC is a good penalty killer. Nurse has obviously done a good job for us. Duncan Keith's a good penalty killer, but that Bouchard's going to have to get up and running there. Tyson Barrie is more on the offensive side, so it will. Our third third left defenseman is probably, is it Cuckoo, is it Russell, Lageson's in that mix. Somebody's going to have to help out over there a little bit there. And I think Duncan has played a little bit over there. So, but that's it's certainly something we're going to have to look at here, because both Larson and Bear were good right-handed, right penalty killers that we're going to have to look at and make sure we're covered off there. But it's certainly an area that I think Evan Bouchard, everybody thinks of him as an offensive guy, but it is an area I think he can build into.
You mentioned Jesse Puljujarvi and just his development. And to me, it wasn't a huge surprise because, you look at the history of a lot of European players, they get to 22 years of age. And, that's when a lot of them start to feel comfortable. You can go back to the Koivus and Solanis. Heck, look at the Sedins before they really became, dominant players. Puljujarvi's 6'4", Dave. He's probably he is your biggest forward. He's a real strong guy. I know he's been taking some boxing lessons this summer. Not that he's going to be a fighter, but he wants to feel more confident on the ice. What did you see in the growth of Puljujarvi last season that you believe he can take another step this year?
Well, he came in, I think, physically, like you say, he's a specimen, right? He's phenomenal. But I think at the start of the year last year, he wasn't sure how it was going to go. Ken and I had spent a lot of time talking to him, but it's different. You walk into that dressing room with, guys that were teammates before, and you're not sure how it's going to go. I give him a ton of credit because he didn't over try to fit in. He came in and said, you know what, my play is going to dictate how everybody feels about me. And the better he played, obviously he endears himself to his teammates, and he took off. And once you could see he was, I wouldn't say uncomfortable would be the wrong way to put it. He was tentative at the start of camp coming in, but as his game grew and as he become more comfortable, and every day I love the guy. He's so much fun to have on the ice. He's smiling all the time. You do a drill and he's competing like crazy, and he's laughing, and he's having fun playing out there. Those are the guys you love to coach. So as he became more comfortable and started having some success, all the past memories of where it was were behind him. He's a new player, a new opportunity, and he was a real good player for us, like a really good player.
Dave, we go back to the normal schedule this season. You play the teams in the East once, home and away. You play within your division, but there's none of the mini-series games. As a coach, did you like that last season of playing the same team, 2 nights in a row? Did it allow maybe to prepare for a team better because, okay, we got this team for 2 games. We worry about that for 2 games. You weren't always bringing in a new team, every time. I know you always worry about yourself, but you still have to focus a little bit on the opposition. Did you like that? Would you like that, not just from a travel perspective to save, time and wear and tear on the players, but also coaching? Was it better? Did you like it facing the same team on those miniseries?
You know what? I did. It was, I'll put that, I did with a caveat. I like 2, 3 is getting a little tough. 4, I think we had 2 4s or 1 4 or something. 4 is too many. Okay. Too many in the regular season. But the back-to-back game, what they do is, and when we first started doing it, we put a lot of onus on, let's try to win that first game, because then I always thought the second game against the team, that was the bonus win. If you win the first one, obviously the team that just lost, they're extra motivated to get that back. So if you win the first one, the second one's a bonus game. You're gaining points on everybody if you're getting that bonus game. So there is a little intrigue into it. There's a tactical part. You're making subtle adjustments. So I enjoyed some of that. Wouldn't be like an every series thing, but I did enjoy it. There was parts of the schedule last year that were good, but it's hard to judge it. Like that Canadian division would have been unbelievable if there would have been fans. Like the emotion and the passion in every game was phenomenal, but with no fans, there's a lot of times when you didn't feel that. And I know both teams didn't feel that, so I'm looking forward to get back to the regular schedule. That being said, I do what you're saying. I think there's some merit into it now and then that could be, it makes for good rivalries.
Just talking about something as specific, Dave, as having right shot guys on your penalty kill. I'm just curious, in the off season, are you a guy that is, carrying around a notepad, scribbling some thoughts down, or looking at different combinations, or thinking about different things? Or are you someone that sort of can get a break and stop thinking about hockey?
No, I think you're always thinking about it. It's always in the back of your mind. It's funny. We were sitting around after the golf tournament last night. There was a table that was it was Joel Quenneville, myself, Kevin Dineen, and Ron Francis, and that we were all just laughing at each other. Like, you got all these people having fun and partying, and the wives are dancing and everything, and you got four grumpy old guys talking about hockey back in the corner. So I don't think you ever get it out of your mind. And you're listening to guys, and Joel Quenneville's wife was telling me the other day a funny story. Joel will be sitting outside, and his wife will be sitting beside him, and all of a sudden he'll just start talking, and she goes, he thinks that I'm the other coach, so he'll be talking about lineups and this and that. She goes, I don't know what he's talking about, but I just sit there and he talks to me and he thinks so it's just a way to get stuff off your mind. But it never gets off your mind. You're always thinking about, okay, how maybe a combination, is there tweaks we can make? Is there situations where you think you can maximize the player's talents more, somebody that you got to be aware of? I mean, there's all things. And then there's the mental stuff going into it. Is, how does this guy feel about playing, on this line or this role as compared to a different one? So there's always things you're thinking about, and it's about building a team, but that never goes away. And now this year we're dealing with, right now you're trying to, like we're talking about schedule. You got a regular schedule, you got Olympic schedule, non-Olympic schedule. I'm a guy that likes to get all that stuff and make sure we're down pat with it, before the season starts. You're talking to our travel assistant the other day, and she's going, well, we got a lot of variables here right now, so there's a lot that, I don't know. It's just when you're in the game, you're always in the game.
Makes sense. And last one for me, Dave. You mentioned Cody Ceci, and you got a chance to watch some of his video. I was just curious what your relationship is like with Ken, working with him. Obviously, he's another guy that's always in the game, head in the game, always do up to something, grinding and working hard. Just in terms of your inclusion in the process, were you someone that sort of watches video on a guy after you get him, or were you involved beforehand, sort of saying, hey, look, this guy might be a fit in terms of the process, talking to Ken?
No, Ken and his staff do a great job. They'll go out in the pro scouts and stuff, and they'll identify people. But then once we get down to kind of a shorter list, Ken will bring it to the coaches and say, here's some options we're looking at. Let me know what you guys are thinking. And then, with the video, we have the ability to watch anybody's shifts. I mean, you can grab it anywhere right now. So, on the defensive part, Jimmy Playfair has a look, I have a look, and we give Ken our feedback, and then he takes it and goes from there. And then you get into the business part of the game. You never know how that's going to go. But Ken and his staff do a great job. And for us, I like the way that he just, he's not going to bring something that or throw out names that are not reality. When he brings us something, we know it's serious. We have a look at it and we give our opinion on it. So that's the way it should work. Ken is a really, really good guy to work for. He's a real, he's so genuine. He is who he is, and he's very easy to work with. Very easy. It's very good.
Dave, earlier on our very first episode, we had Paul Maurice on, and we talked about analytics, and he says if we just called it information, it would probably diffuse a lot of the arguments for people. And you were someone that even when you played, and then of course when you coached, you were tracking a lot of this stuff yourself, and I know you still do today. What in your experience over 20 years of tracking stuff, when you track it, and then you need the video to match it, are there some areas that can be deceiving on what you're tracking, that you think it shows something, then you go look at the video and say, well, that's actually not what the numbers tell me? Have you learned over the years, are there some things that maybe seem deceiving on the paper until you watch it on video?
Yeah, you know what, I like what you just said about the information, because a lot of times what you're doing is you have a game that you watched or you coached in or you played in, and you have a feel for that game, how it went. and then you watch it on video, it gets a little, you might have a little different feeling, and then you do some stats on it, and not just goals and assists and stuff, so do some different stuff on it, and you're getting a whole different feel for it. So, and it's two things. It's as a group, as a team, what did you do as a team, and then individuals. And there's been times early on there, and I use this a lot of times with players, where a player will make one bad mistake that costs a goal or whatever, and he gauges his whole game. He might have played 20 minutes, and that was a 10-second play but his whole game, I asked him how he played. He said, I played poor. I just made that mistake. But the rest of the game might have been unbelievable for him. Like he was solid and a plus player on chances and everything. So you can grab a guy like that and say, hey, you know what? This is a mistake we made. Let's learn from that one. But there's parts of this that you should feel really good about. And then there's other guys, it goes the other way too, where guy gets 2 goals and he's feeling good about himself, but the rest of his game is red rotten, and there's a lot of areas that, stand on the crease in the power play and get 2 tap-ins and you get first star, and the rest of the game's not so much. So there's a lot of things. You use it as a tool. I've done it for a long, long time. I think there's some analytics stuff that is not. I think you're looking for information that's not there. You're trying to quantify something that's not there or has no bearing on the game. But there is some stuff that is significant that you can look at that can help you and just gives you information of where maybe improvements are needed, or where you can make sure your stuff is good and you can exploit teams. There's a lot of different information to use as a team. And then you break it down as a player too. Players want information, and sometimes it's good and bad. I use it a lot as a good thing, or to promote confidence, to show a player what is actually happening. Say he's not scoring, and I can show him the chances he's getting, or opportunities he's getting, or the opportunity he's creating for his teammates, that become a very, it drives confidence in the player, even though they might not be scoring or as much as they'd like, so players have to feel like they're contributing to be confident. And there's a lot of times you can show some stuff like that gets that point across.
Yeah. One last one for me before rapid fire, Dave. So I get a sense from listening to you, when you break down stuff with the player, do you focus more on showing the player what they're doing well in video, rather than, and mix in maybe the odd, okay, here's where it is that didn't go well, so the player can still leave the video session feeling like, hey, I'm doing more well? Because in a lot of cases, I'm guessing players probably still do more good than bad, but the one bad mistake is really what, gnaws away at them, rather than a lot of the positive small ones. How do you balance that in your video sessions with players?
Well, most of my video sessions, there's very few, there's learning clips, and there's learning good and bad, right? There'll always be positive clips in it. Maybe a couple times a year, I would call them the mulligans. It's like a coach going in and screaming at the players now. You might get 2 of those a year. After that, they're dialing you out. There's the odd time when you got to have a little, and the players know when there's a video session coming that is a little reality check, there's not many positives in it. Right. But most of the time, like our video sessions will be, depending whether there'll be a pre-scout, maybe one that says, okay, here's, you're showing a little bit of the other team. And then, but most of our videos are all videos that would be, okay, here's a learning clip, here's what we've done well, in a pre-scout, we might say, okay, here's Vancouver's neutral zone forecheck. And I show one clip of that, but then I'll show 5 of us, whether it's against Vancouver before or against another team that plays the same structure. Here's 5 of us beating it. This is what we got to look at. So there's just trends going into it, and then there's stuff after a game, like you're showing some mistakes we made, some areas that like there might be a simple thing as we weren't quick enough on pucks or didn't win enough battles. And I might show 2 of those, just like they're 5-second hits, boom, boom, and just message across. And you're not, very, very seldom do I ever single anybody out. But that being said, when there's a clip and we need to improve, usually there's 3 or 4 guys in it. It's positioning. Here's what we got to do. You guys are, or whoever here, Leon, you got to be above the puck here. You can't be cheating below it, or, there's things like that are said that you might, it's not singling a guy out. It's just saying, hey, positionally wise, this is where this has to be,
Awesome, Dave. We like to always end with rapid fire. The only rule is you have to answer the question. So we like to have some fun with it.
I can't defer.
Yeah, no deferring. So we'll start with one. A lot of people don't know this, but a young Dave Tippett, I hear, was a quite skilled soccer player and actually went to like a European camp. So at the height of your soccer and the height of your hockey, did you have better hands in hockey or better feet in soccer?
Feet in soccer.
And so what stopped you from taking the soccer route?
I played for the Canadian national team right till under 16 or under 18. And then North Dakota gave me a scholarship to go to school. And that summer I was still playing real competitive soccer, and I hurt my knee. And North Dakota said, if you're coming here, soccer's got to go the other way. But Canada, there used to be a contest, and it was a world contest. There used to be a contest years ago called the Adidas Skills Contest.
Yes.
It was all about juggling the ball and all that stuff. I won that twice for Canada I think I was 12 and 14. I won it 2 times and went to compete in the Worlds in Europe.
So if I threw a soccer ball into the Oilers pregame skate, how many dribbles could Dave Tippett do today? Or juggles?
I'll tell you a funny story about this. Back when I was assistant coach in LA, and the guys played soccer outside, and the caveat on it is I've had 3 neck surgeries. I don't know if it's from soccer, but I was walking by and the ball flipped over me. I had a suit and a tie on. It was before the game, and I headed it back to one guy, and they laughed, and I said, if I juggle this thing 50 times on my head, give me $100. And they all laughed at me. And I put it up there. I juggled it 50 times and handed it back to them. They gave me the money.
Oh, I love it.
The first event, when I did the Adidas Skills, the world event was over in Paris. The first event was you had to be in the center circle. And you started in the center circle. You juggled it 300 times on your right foot, and then 300 times on your left foot, 300 times back and forth, and 100 times on your head for 1,000 points without dropping it. And that was the first event. And I did that.
Jeez.
So we know not to play 2-touch with Dave. Okay.
That's years ago. My soccer days are way behind me now.
Dave, after a big win, or maybe after you're shooting around a golf, what's your cocktail of choice?
Right now, Tito's and Fresca.
Ooh, Fresca. Okay, I like it. I haven't tried that.
That's in Arizona, and that's when you're playing in the heat. You got to have something a little citrus there.
Okay, I like it. Now, I was going through the Hartford Whalers team. There's Dave Tippett, Kevin Dineen, of course, Joel Quenneville, Dean Evison, Doug Jarvis, Randy Ladouceur, Al Samuelson, Dineen Francis, of course, is a GM. Like, I don't know if there's a team that's had that many guys become NHL head coaches or assistant coaches. So excluding them, which other former teammate of yours who didn't coach would have been a good coach?
Who was there? Ray talked like a coach, but his strength was talking. Mike Liu thinks the game really well, but he's above coaching. He didn't want to mess around with that. There were some other good ones there. Like, I think Brad Shaw is a good coach who doesn't get credit for being there. Who else? Paul McDermott is a junior owner. There was a guy, there was when I first got there, Mike Zook, and not many people remember Mike Zook, but an old Mike Zook was a smart old player. There was a lot of, here's one for you. A guy that would be a really good coach because he was really laid back and a good person, Ray Neufeld.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Ray Neufeld Ray was a good man, really good man.
Of all the players you've coached in the NHL, who do you think could be the best head coach when their career's done, or if they've already retired?
You know who I think is going to be a good coach, have a chance to be a head coach? Steve Ott.
Yeah, Otter. He's definitely one of the best chirpers I've ever met in my life.
He's the best I've ever had in the chirping department. Yeah, but he's you know what? He's a passionate guy. Really knows the game, work ethic, and he's a guy I think's got a chance.
Dave, thanks so much for playing Rapid Fire, and continued success. Enjoy your golf season now that you got your new DeChambeau handles. You can get back on the course.
I might try to play a little bit the next couple of weeks, but then we'll look to head up to Edmonton early September here. So the summer's winding down.
Awesome, Dave. Well, good to see you again, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks very much,
Dave.
guys.
That's Dave Tippett, NHL head coach and clearly multi-sport athlete. 1,000 dribbles, Frank. Think you could dribble a soccer ball 10 times right now?
No, I can't even count that high. Come on. Like, that's insane. I watched those guys play two-touch before the game back when we were allowed in at event level. And it was, for those guys, not soccer players, it was still something to behold because they're such good athletes. But to see someone like Dave Tippett do it, that'd be awesome.
Oh, yeah. Well, I do find that some of the best guys in two-touch are some of the European players. Like, they can really dominate. Obviously soccer is a little bit bigger over there. It's growing a lot in North America. And, Dave, it's interesting. A lot of good tidbits from that conversation with Dave. He's always been a student of the game. There's no question. And, how he has to try to glean some information, when it comes to analytics, that you're trying to find something that isn't there. But then also how, sometimes the video and the stats can change what you think you saw. So there's definitely strengths to it for sure. But I think sometimes some stuff gets overplayed and people connecting dots that aren't there.
Yeah. And you know what? By far the most interesting part of the interview for me was what he mentioned about Evan Bouchard and how big of a role he might play on this team. Because looking at, as I mentioned in the question, the roster on paper, Tyson Barrie comes back and is probably going to be that power play quarterback that people thought Bouchard might grow into that role this season. And there just doesn't seem to be a lot of room on paper for him to chew off or steal a bunch of minutes and for him to come in and have that ability to do so. I think it would just make everyone better.
Well, the fact that, they're going to want to give him some time on the penalty kill, I think is intriguing for me for sure. But the other thing, Frank, I'll say this right now. I don't count out Evan Bouchard at all midway through the season being the guy who plays some minutes with Darnell Nurse 5-on-5. So I can say you heard it here first, but Evan Bouchard, he's 6'3". Size does matter when everybody's all skilled the same. And he's been training the offseason with Darnell Nurse. We didn't get a lot into the Darnell Nurse extension with Dave. He doesn't sign the contract, so I didn't really think it was necessary. But, the one thing about Nurse's conditions always been off the charts, right? We saw it in the playoffs when he played like 65 minutes, didn't even look like he was tired. And then he just flew home and, didn't go to bed and, had the birth of his first child, which is pretty cool. But, Evan Bouchard, when I talked to him at the end of the year, he felt like he learned a lot from being around the group and watching. And now he'll learn just how to be a professional. I've talked to a lot of young players, like they train really hard, but then there's like training with elite guys. And Darnell Nurse is one of the elite
strivers,
condition athletes. So I think Evan Bouchard, I won't be surprised at all if Evan Bouchard comes out and has a really impactful season on the back end for the Edmonton Oilers. He's 22 years of age now. When the season begins, he'll be a guy who can make an impact and possibly even more of a role than Puljujarvi, simply because as a defenseman, he'll play more minutes.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I really like about the Oilers is just the collection of strivers that they have, guys that are pushing themselves every summer to get better. McDavid is obviously on that list. Draisaitl has joined him, Nurse, and then you add another guy like Bouchard, and pretty soon it starts to rub off on the rest of the guys on the roster.
Yeah, the big wild card in Edmonton is, can Dylan Holloway come in and push for a spot? And if so, does that mean maybe Nugent-Hopkins, they slide him to center with Draisaitl and McDavid, something that people have talked about as a potential. So for the first time in probably 2 decades, Edmonton has some legit depth up front, something they haven't had in a long time. Frank?
You heard it from Tip right there. All you need is the support in the playoffs, the depth, get the quantity of really good players up. I think that's the lesson and takeaway from Tampa Bay is they win 2 Stanley Cups on the back of their depth.
And the other thing is, how many people are going to try those new fat grips now from DeChambeau? If that can, if Dave can get back golfing,
that's one of the best testimonials and plugs we've heard for a product in a long time. We're going to have to hire him here on the Daily Faceoff.
Yeah, you bet. Awesome, Frank. We'll talk to you later this week.
Thanks for listening to the DFO Rundown with Saravalli and Gregor. Keep it locked on dailyfaceoff.com and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from to never miss an episode. Delivered by DoorDash.